Well, Otago University researchers are concerned a controversial computer-based risk prediction model to profile and target ACC clients may be hurrying people off ACC instead of helping out. They're questioning that by passing the buck to the machine, the agency might be ducking its responsibility to make fair and humane decisions about treatment of New Zealanders in need. ACC says the system, known as the Survival Analysis Model, has been used for 3 years and was designed to process claims more efficiently. But details of the model and how it's used are vague on the agency's website. The most concrete information available says the tool is used to predict which clients were most likely to need help and should be called, which type of case manager should help, and how long ACC expected a claim to be managed. Alistair Knott is Associate Professor at the University of Otago and investigator for the university's Artificial Intelligence and Law in New Zealand project. Alistair, good morning.
Morning, Catherine.
We know that models can help with efficiencies. We know that they're used widely and are set to be used increasingly. What is your concern about this one?
Well, to start with, I'd want to say that I don't want to be too alarmist about this. It's fundamentally a good thing for people's decision-making to be informed by statistics. That's part of ordinary science, and we want a scientific procedure for making decisions. It's just that there's, and this is techniques that people use every day in science. It's just that these techniques are starting to come into the social services and public policy and decision-making in that area increasingly. So, yes, we're concerned that we should know about these systems, how they work in more detail so that there can be a bit of public scrutiny, that's all.
If we are talking about models like this, and I'm interested in where they sit on a continuum of sophistication, if we're talking about models like this, typically a model is only as good as the inputs, even if you're doing it by hand, right? It's only as good as the inputs that you're putting into it.
That's right.
With this kind of modelling, is it as straightforward as input, calculation, output, projection? Or are we talking about AI? Are we talking about machine learning? Are we talking about ever more sophisticated predictions coming out the other end?
So we don't actually know exactly how the ACC system works. The chances are it's a very simple kind of machine learning technique called regression. We don't actually know that yet. But yes, in terms of the spectrum of AI, as you were saying, there's very sophisticated AI and more simple AI. I barely call this AI at all, actually. I would call it applied statistics. And as I said, it's the kind of statistics, regression statistics, that people in science departments all over the world would be using every day. So I would hesitate to call it AI. But it is a form of statistics that's being used increasingly in decision-making, for instance, in social services. And therefore, it's worth scrutinizing just a little bit and finding out exactly what it is and how it works.
Okay, I want to come back to that question of whether it is merely the application of statistics or whether it may, over time, become something else. But let's work out exactly what we know or don't know at the moment. What do we know about what the computer, say, or the model is asked to do at the moment? As we said, we're working off the website pretty much. What is your understanding of what this model is asked to do?
Well, I think you summarised it very well from reading from the ACC website. There's two things that it's doing. One of them is to decide. So the ACC use case owners to human employees, case owners to look after individual cases, and I understand that this system is used partly to work out which case owners should be assigned to which cases. And you can imagine that there might be some cases which are complicated and therefore should be given to more experienced people. I'm sort of speculating there. And other ones are easier and could be given to people who are more junior. So that's one possible use. But the other thing that they say is that that it's used to predict how long an ACC case is likely to last for. So some of them, might be, again, quite simple, and others might go on for a long time. And so it might be used to do that. So, yeah, those are the two central uses as I understand.
Your concern about the vagueness of the description. So which clients are likely to need help should be called proactively, which type of case owner should assist the client, and how long should we expect a claim to be managed. That's what we know. The vagueness of that concerns you how?
We'd like to know in more detail exactly what variable is predicted by this system. So a statistical system, if it really is a survival analysis system, and again, we're not completely sure about that, then it'll be predicting some variable and its occurrence and how long it'll take to occur. So we would like to know from ACC exactly what that variable is. What are they trying to predict? We're not completely sure.
What are the possible variables? Type of injury? What are the possibilities?
Well, I think the most likely one is how long an ACC case is going to last. But again, that's me speculating. But that's the one that comes to mind.
And what would be the inputs that would help determine that? It would be based presumably on historical data. What kind of inputs?
Yeah, things like previous medical history of the applicant, but also I'm not sure what else. We'd like to know. We'd like to know what other variables go into this statistical system.
The nature of the injury would be an obvious one.
Yes, nature of the injury, but also maybe previous claims, who knows, and maybe other demographics. They would probably be helpful in working out this predictor, but we don't know what the system actually uses, and we think it would be useful for that to be known.
If the prediction emerges from the model, what is your concern about what then happens with it?
Well, that's another question that we're interested to know. So presumably what's happening here is that there's a human case owner, case manager, who is making a decision about how an ACC claim will be treated, how it will be processed, and they are consulting the prediction made by this statistical system. And that's a situation that people find themselves in a lot. Their decision-making is guided in part by a machine based on lots of data, more data than they could ever possibly imagine. So we find ourselves in that situation when we're surfing on Amazon or something and we see that Amazon recommends a book for us. Well, it does that because it's predicted that we're going to like that book. Or when we read Gmail and we see an ad, well, that ad pops up because Google predict, based on some information about our use of Gmail or whatever, that we're going to like the product that they're advertising. So we're constantly in a situation these days, we're increasingly in a situation where our behavior or our decisions is influenced by the predictions of machines. So yes, that's an interesting situation to be in, and one which we feel needs more discussion, especially as it pertains to social services and public services.
Is your concern about this that the power of suggestion leads us to self-fulfilling prophecies? In other words, same as Amazon just suggesting to you a certain selection of choices that then becomes an outcome that then reinforces the offering of that selection of choices. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, and that's an interesting sort of dynamic that we can feel ourselves falling into sometimes. So one of the issues we'd like to talk about is how ACC employees are trained up in the use of this system, because in other systems like this, people have been kind of pointing out a danger of falling to a sort of autopilot mode where, because this system is quite reliable or something, you feel that your own contribution isn't necessary anymore and you just go along with the recommendations of the system. So it's very important, I think, in any of these systems that the human part of the decision-making process receives training about how they should use this piece of computer-generated advice.
Otherwise, as we say, if the statistics end up overtly or overly influencing the outcome, the outcome then becomes part of the statistics that determine the next decision. All right. Yeah. Look. Speaking of the human agents in this, what are your concerns about the variability specifically relating to ACC outcomes? Because I would have thought, even though a bell curve will tell us that we're going to get a reasonably predictable set of results normally from a given set of conditions, individual factors can make a big difference to someone. The state of mind might have a big effect on progress through injury recovery of various kinds, right?
Absolutely.
Support system might have, the support of an employer, or all these things. Individual variables would likely have an impact, and are you concerned that they also might come to carry less weight when there's a hard set of data sitting in front of someone?
Well, I think that's why it's particularly important that ACC employees are effectively trained, and for all we know they are. It's just that we would like to know that as a matter of finding that out. How are they trained in the use of these systems? So actually we came to this ACC issue because we're studying a slightly different issue, which is the use of predictive systems in policing. And this doesn't happen in New Zealand, as far as we know. But we've been studying it in the US. And over there's a system that predicts how likely a defendant is to reoffend based on variables. And it's probably the same sort of system as this ACC system. As I say, we don't know, but it's probably the same sort of thing. And in that case, critics were definitely leveling this idea that judges prone to go onto autopilot mode and just believe the pronouncements of this predictive system, when, as you say, the predictive system gets at some variables, but really not all of them at all. We don't want to overtrust this stuff. We want to use statistics, and we want our decision-making processes to be guided by statistics, but we also want to keep our human intuitions about us, because there are lots of variables that these systems just aren't able to represent.
In the case of ACC, I'm wondering if part of your concern and the concerns of others has been its focus, and it was given this focus by its political masters for some time, on reducing the so-called long-term tail, people who had been on the ACC for quite a long time, and that was a serious goal given to the agency. And I guess this brings us back to the model. A model is not value-free, is it? The priorities and intentions of the inputs will affect the model. And is this what you're worried about? Again, this you've alluded to it. It might be used to get people off ACC, perhaps before, in their individual circumstances, that's the right outcome.
Well, yes. So, as you say, ACC has... as a mission, it's been given a mission by government, and we want to make sure that the system, the way that it works, is consistent with that mission, basically. And that's why we think it should be a matter of public debate, or this information should be in the public domain. We need to know a bit more about what variables are taken in and what variables are produced as output, so that we can tell whether its use is in line with ACC's mandate.
ACC says average time taken to set up weekly compensation for clients has dropped 11 days in June 2014 to 7 days in June 2017. So the 3 years this model's been used. It's also seen an increase in customer satisfaction, going from 68% satisfied in June 2013 to a current result of 78%. So it's looking and saying, look, the model is giving us some good results, some good efficiency results, and that's pleasing our clients.
Absolutely. And I really don't, again, like I said at the very start, I don't want to suggest that this is, systems of this sort shouldn't be used. They're extremely useful, and they can make all sorts of efficiencies. So in this area or other areas, it's just a matter of we need to know a bit more about how it works.
That matter, and I know it's been raised by others who I'm thinking particularly of the researcher Warren Forster, who's trying to get data out of ACC over actual decline rates, and has already had a concession from ACC that they might have been understated somewhat. I don't want to go back in detail. Listeners can to my interview with him. But he's frustrated that all this data and information is there, but apparently not collated in a way that can be publicly released. And again, is that a concern? Be transparent with all the data that you hold so that we can make sense of what you're using your predictive tools for.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's no question of making any of this data public, and that's not in anyone's mind. But we would like to know more about
the decline rates, including the decline rates at each stage of someone's contact with ACC, which is what he's had particular attention on.
Yeah, so we would be interested. So this system has presumably been evaluated internally by ACC. They will have done an evaluation to work out how good its predictions are. Again, we don't know what the predicted variable is, but whatever it is, they would have checked to see how well the predictions are working. And that's a piece of data which we think it would be useful for the public to know. So if the ACC is using this system, how well does it work?
You mentioned policing. I know this has been an issue, particularly in the United States. And just remind me again of what has been identified there, that the predictive tool in some ways, as I understand it, has almost reinforced a pre-existing bias. As we said, a model will only ever be as good as its inputs. What's been uncovered about the use of the predictive tool in policing?
So, as you say, there might be bias in the data going in. So, for instance, that most of the work in the US policing context has been around issues of racism. So we know that black people are stopped and searched more frequently than white people by a long chalk. So that means that there's going to be more criminals caught who are black, just because they've been looked for more intensely. So you might imagine that data is being, that the data that's coming in already contains that bias. This is what you're getting at.
And then the stop and search is based on the predictive model. So again, the data gets reinforced. For example, you could have 4 black Americans walk past you and stop and search all of them, and okay, on one of them you locate, say, I don't know, some personal cannabis use in the States where that's still illegal. The 4 white American people might walk past you and none are stopped because the profiling suggests they're lower risk. Let's say there might be 2 out of the 4 carrying the cannabis, but they're not stopped.
Exactly. So I should also say, the uses of these kind of predictive technologies, again, I hesitate to call it AI because it's just statistics, really. But they can be used for very positive purposes in these kind of areas as well. So, for instance, human police officers have biases, and it's those biases that lead to these discrepancies in the stop and search rates. And actually, there's been some very interesting work from groups of researchers in the US that have found that if they used their own statistical tool, their own sort of quote AI unquote tool, then they would be able to get almost the same rates with their stop and search just by asking a couple of specific questions and then running the prediction thing and saying, okay, you should search this person but not this person. They'd be able to reduce the number of false stop and searches that they made by a large amount. So that's a situation where these statistical tools can be really used for a positive purpose. And I want to emphasize that this tool can be used for positive purposes, and that's an example of one where you're actually using it to reduce or combat discrimination in humans. And so that's
it is a complex situation, though, Alistair. I don't know how familiar you are with the Ministry of Social Development and tools that have been developed and not yet used, as I understand it, by that ministry. Again, stories that we did interviews on, I think, a year ago. And this is about prediction of children who are at risk, essentially. And a set number of inputs can go in, and they will probably give you, statistically, a pretty good indicator. The problem is, what do you then do with that? Do you then intervene before there's even a hint of a problem? Do you have children who are labelled being at risk when there may be no problem in their family? And I think this is what the ministry itself is grappling with, how qualified and capable social workers would have to be to safely utilise such a tool and carry such information. Could you speak on that?
Yeah, I certainly don't have any answers about that kind of situation. I agree, there are proper moral dilemmas there. But to me, the key thing is that there needs to be more discussion in our society about how these kind of tools can be used in those kind of extremely kind of ethically thorny contexts. And that's a discussion that needs to involve technologists, but also public policy people, lawyers, and people who have experience at the coalface of some of these issues. So the new thing is that technology has a potential role to play in these questions, in these decisions, but the answers to these tricky questions can't be asked, can't be made just by technologists or just by public policy people. There has to be more of a discussion between technologists, particularly in this new AI area, and people in public policy.
Companies are using these tools also increasingly, are they? And do we know if they are in New Zealand, whether it's your bank or anyone else?
Well, they're all over the internet. So you can't go on the internet without ads arriving which are targeted to you, and you can't go on the internet.
I meant more assessing whether or not you're going to get credit, say, or
Oh, absolutely. So these same sorts of technologies are used to do that, and have been for a long time, actually. So I think it's been in something like, in credit assignment areas,
insurance,
or insurance.
Yeah.
These are basically actuarial techniques.
Here's the AI factor, though. I appreciate what you're saying, that at the moment we're talking about let's face it, pretty pacey computers that can handle a lot of incoming data, but we're essentially using applied statistics. But with the machine learning, is this something we need to sort out now? Because given the amount of data that we are all putting out there about ourselves, phenomenal amounts of data that we are putting out there ourselves, and given the advent of machine learning increasingly into our lives, the ability to take ever-increasing amounts of ever more nuanced data, is this something we need to sort out now?
Yes. Yes. This is the discussion we need to be having. We need to be discussing what use we want to put to these very powerful techniques. We want to know how they should be used. There's all sorts of positive applications, but we need to discuss this. And again, as I said, this discussion needs to involve technologists, but also public policy people.
In public policy at the moment, do you see a reflection? It was just interesting talking to our guests yesterday about the power of Google and Facebook and Amazon, and we were talking about this gap between the ways that these technology-savvy companies and their dominance has grown at such extraordinary speed, and their role in our public lives have grown at such extraordinary speed, and yet the law and economics, and particularly public policy and political governance and oversight, has nowhere near seemed to keep pace. When you look at New Zealand, do you see in our public policy sphere, even in our political sphere, an awareness and a sphere by which these discussions are being had?
Yes, I do. So there is increasing prominence of this whole topic of how AI is going to impact on our society. I'm seeing much more discussion around that, and actually there are organisations around the country and locally in universities as well where people are talking exactly about these issues, and I think that's an important conversation to encourage. Basically, we need to be having an interdisciplinary conversation about these topics.
It's interesting, in a recent pre-election debate I was at involving the tech sector, they said, look, the government's got a chief information officer, it's got a chief science advisor. Does it need a chief technology advisor, not only for the practical side of technology, but perhaps for just these matters?
I don't know about that.
What's your hesitation?
Well, I just don't know. I mean, I'm a computer scientist, and I'm just sort of diving into this area of public policy. I don't want to make too many pronouncements. It's an interesting kind of new thing that technologists are sort of creeping out of academia and starting to discuss these sorts of topics. I don't know about that particular one, but I would like to be involved in the discussion, that would help to determine that.
Thank you. Please crawl out more often, Alistair. Come back and talk to us again. Alistair Knott, Associate Professor at the University of Otago, investigator for the university's Artificial Intelligence and Law in New Zealand project.